Hi, in this lesson we're going to be looking at dilations. We're talking about dilations. What we're talking about is an enlargement or a reduction. We're changing the size of our original figure. And so our image is always going to be similar to the pre-image, so all the things we learned about similarity will apply here. There's two things that we're going to need to use to do a dilation. And one is going to be a center point, here it's K, and a scale factor. So in this case, if I'm going from the blue, that's my pre-image, to my red, which is my image, I have a scale factor here of 2. Okay, and that means that it's doubling in size from my pre-image to my image. So first of all, you might wonder what the center has to do with it. And notice that what we've done here is we've drawn lines from that center through the point C on my pre-image, or through the point B on my pre-image, or through the point A on my pre-image. And if we continue those lines, as you can see here from C, my image is always going to be on that line. And the scale factor tells me how far to go. What I'm going to do is measure the distance from K to C, and since it's my scale factor is 2, I'm going to multiply by the scale factor here, 2. I double it, and so measuring from my center twice as far, that's going to take me over here to C prime, or twice as far from B is going to take me to B prime, twice as far to A will be K to A prime, and that will always double my figure. Notice this figure has not turned in any way. It's the same shape, same size, all the angles are congruent, so it's a similar figure. A scale factor of 1/2 would do the same thing, but it would treat maybe our red one as our pre-image, and then dividing this distance from K to C prime would take me to C, so that would give me a scale factor of 1/2. Now let's look at the dilation by using Sketchpad. And here I've already done one as an example. Now let's look first of all what my center will do. If I move my center, notice it's going to change where my image is. The green one is my pre-image, that's my original, and then I have a scale factor here that's making this a little bit smaller. And I've done this by a ratio here. I'll show you how to do that later. But notice as I change that ratio, it might be an enlargement where it gets bigger, or a reduction where it gets smaller. Also, let's notice what happens when I use a line to connect the points. If I go from Q to my original point A, or Q to B, Q to C, notice all of these lines are passing through the points on my image. And as I move this, those are always going to slide along those lines formed there, even if I move my center. We can also put the center inside of my triangle, which just moves everything. Each point is moving closer to the center. Okay, I'm going to teach you two different ways to do a dilation on Sketchpad. Now the first one isn't as interesting because once you do it, it's fixed and you can't change it. But the other one's going to allow us to keep working with it when we're done. So the first thing we're going to do, and this one is a little bit easier, is we just need to mark a center. So double click on there, or you can go up to Transform, mark a center after you've highlighted it. Then we're going to highlight the figure. We want to transform triangle ABC. We'll go to Transform and Dilate, and this box will come up. Notice that we're doing about a fixed ratio, about the center Q as we've marked. But here's where I can't change it to marked ratio because we haven't done that. So we just choose our scale factor. We see a preview here of 1/2, or I could do it like twice as big. You could do 2/1, or for whatever ratio you want, and then go ahead and hit dilate, and that will give you your new figure. Now I can't change the size. I could change where my center is, but that's my dilation with a scale factor of 2. The other way to do it is by marking a ratio. To do this, we'll go ahead and start just like before by marking our center. What I'm going to need to do now is create two segments. I'll just do that off on the corner of my page. They can be different sizes. We're going to be able to change those later. We'll highlight both of them and go to the Measure, Ratio. Now notice this gives me a little ratio comparing these two segments, and that's going to change as I move this point, which is good. So if I wanted a scale factor of, say, 1 point of about 2, this will give me a scale factor 2. Or if I wanted a 1/2, I could move this to where it's about 1/2. So it's not going to be as precise, but it's something that we can change. Okay, now I'm going to highlight this ratio. I'll go to Transform, and notice this mark scale factor is here. Sometimes it'll say mark ratio, sometimes it'll say mark scale factor. And after I've done that, we're ready to dilate. We're going to highlight our figure. We've already marked the center and the scale factor. Go to transform, dilate. This time when the box pops up, notice marked ratio shown. It's still saying about center Q. We still have a preview here. And I'm just going to go ahead and say dilate. And now if I want to change the size of this, notice I can do that by changing either one of these segments. Notice also I get really close to Q, but if I turn around it's going to increase again. So we're always going from Q towards our figure or away from our figure. And just like we saw in line 1, it's always going to follow along those lines there. Okay, next let's look at what happens if we do a dilation by a negative ratio. So here's my original figure, here's my image over here. And notice that what I've done here is I've taken my ratio just like we did on the last page, and to get this negative ratio I've highlighted it. To get this negative ratio I've gone to my number and calculate, brings up my calculator, and I'll just type that I want a negative here, and then I'll click on this box. And then that's going to give me a negative number. If I hit OK, this will pop up. And now when I change this ratio, notice that this negative number here is changing with it, and it also gives me this negative here. Now notice how this is different from the positive ratio. The positive ratio was always on the same side of Q as my original triangle, whereas this one's flipping over to the opposite side. If I draw my lines connecting from my center to my original points, notice that they're still going to pass through my B prime, A prime, and C prime. They're just going to be on the opposite side. And so it's also flipping my figure over a couple times, spinning it around really. And we can also change the size of it, enlarging it, or reducing it. So that's how we do dilations on Geometer's Sketchpad.